The history of the Times Media Company begins like all media histories, with the invention of the printing press 550 years ago in Germany, in the seat of the Holy Roman Empire. Timing was everything, even for Christopher Columbus. Others may or may not have discovered America before him, but he happened to land in the Canary Islands about the same time printing presses were beginning to show up across the Western world. You can probably imagine that having an easy, relatively low cost, and convenient option for people to send information to each other had a dramatic effect, very similar to the evolution and proliferation of cell phone technology in our era. By 1500, printing presses had published 20 million books. During the 16th century, that output would increase tenfold. In 200 years, civilization went from thousands of hand-copied volumes to 200 million books in print. Although mass-produced periodicals like newspapers and magazines did not get going until 1600, once started, they grew quickly as well. The first newspaper written in English was published in Amsterdam in 1620. What is generally regarded as the first American colonies newspaper was started in Boston in 1690 by Benjamin Harris. It was called Public Occurrences, both foreign and domestic. But the colonial officials didn't like it, and the paper was only published once. Other papers sprang up in the colonies, and in 1728, at the age of 22, Benjamin Franklin opened his own printing shop in Philadelphia. Among Franklin's numerous achievements was the one that he was the first editor and publisher to use cartoons, and he invented the lending library, where years later anyone who wanted to could come and read the newspaper for free. Newspapers became vitally important, especially after the American Revolution, when the country was reading and adopting the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Benjamin Franklin was not the only famous person to recognize the power of the press. That was a well-known fact. As territories evolved into states and governments were put into place, a local newspaper would soon follow. The voices of the newspaper's publishers and editors, often the same person, became a strong social force tied to opinions and political platforms of the owners. And the next century, when illustrated newspapers became the norm and photography became standard, tens of thousands of newspapers were born. The Abraham Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois, has a fascinating whispering gallery that vividly demonstrates how newspapers and other periodicals used cartoons and hyperbole to drive gossip and speculation, which continuously filled the many newspapers around the country. Newspapers had massive audiences, and that demanded news. Not only were all these readers attractive to those who had a particular interest in influencing public opinion, the newspaper reading public were also consumers. If you had something to sell, you had very little choice. You had to advertise in a newspaper. A matrix was born. Advertising paid most of the cost of the newspaper, and the reader paid a small percentage towards printing and delivery. That model still exists, though it has morphed somewhat in the last 5 years. The close of the 19th century was a golden age. Newspapers and magazines were filled with beautiful illustrations and high-quality photography. By then, newspapers had become a form of public property that Americans believed to be their right. Whether they subscribed or not, most people read a newspaper every day, and like modern internet access, newspapers were available for free at reading rooms, barbershops, taverns, hotels, and coffee houses. It was this kind of world that ignited a dozen ancestor newspapers to what would become the Times of Northwest Indiana. From the start, the Northwest Indiana region has had a codependent relationship with Chicago. Northwest Indiana was discovered by the industrialists in the 1800s who found it too difficult or risky to start businesses in Chicago. A cholera epidemic in Chicago in 1851 prompted German immigrant Ernest Holman to move his tailor shop to Indiana. establishing Homansville near the state line. 17 years later, and 3 years before the Chicago burned to the ground, Chicago had refused to let George Hammond build a meat slaughterhouse. The Swifts and some other big names were already there. So instead, George Hammond built his business on the other side of the river from Homansville. By 1884, Marcus Toll, Hammond's business partner, had obtained a post office for the city now named Hammond. By then, there was a population of more than 5,000 people, mostly factory workers. Hammond quickly became a railroad center with easy access to Chicago, and the businesses and the population kept growing. Over the next 40 years, newspapers came and went in Hammond and Lake County, Indiana. Hammond's own slaughterhouse burned down, and he ended up relocating that business to Chicago. But by then there was numerous factories, schools, communities, and churches, even a distillery for a time. Hammond at one point had a thriving illegal gambling resort operation. Though there were several attempts by authorities to shut it down, nothing worked until it burned down too. What Hammond needed and got was a visionary leader who believed in it. In June of 1906, Sidman McKee, already 43 and an established businessman from Detroit, bought the Hammond Tribune, changed its name to the Lake County Times, and began publishing 5 editions of the paper to get the news out to everyone in the Calumet region: the Gary Evening Times, the East Chicago Times, the Whiting Times, the Calumet City Times, and the Lake County Times. Went from under 1,000 readers to more than 10,000. McKee hired a well-known Chicago newspaper man to be the managing editor, and in 1926, the Times offices were moved to downtown Hammond. The Midwest was hit hard by the Great Depression, and the Hammond Times was cut back to 1 edition. But McKee maintained the paper, a grain elevator, a 5-story building in downtown Hammond, a racetrack, and a golf course. He helped build St. Margaret of Mercy Hospital. McKee was a staunch Republican, and he attended the 1940 party convention that nominated Wendell L. Willkie. During his years as a publisher and a businessman, McKee was a strong advocate for safety gates and warning systems at the many unguarded railroad crossings running through northwest Indiana towns. His concerns were sadly prophetic. On August 30th, 1944, when McKee was 81, he died at St. Margaret's Hospital from injuries sustained the previous Friday when his car was hit by 2 locomotives traveling on the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks on Torrance Avenue near Lansing. McKee's younger brothers, William and Richard, continued to own the paper, which had a subscriber base of 40,000 by 1949. During the 50s and 60s, as the cities and towns in northwest Indiana grew, along with the World War II expanded steel industry, the paper grew too. The Times now had 2 editions serving the Calumet region in both Illinois and Indiana. By the late 1950s, the Times had a circulation of 60,000 copies and 275 employees. In 1962, the Times was sold by the McKee family to the Howard family, owners of Howard Publications based in California. A few years later, a satellite Times office was opened in growing South Lake County, Indiana. In the 1970s, the Times became known as the Times of Northwest Indiana, reflecting the newspaper's move to a more regional focus. Northwest Indiana's economy was still based on manufacturing, but the communities in the region had also become attractive to the growing number of suburbanites and commuters working in Chicago. The Times was about to enter a new era. Times owner Bob Howard's son, Bill, then 40 years old, moved with his family to Northwest Indiana in the mid-1980s. Bill Howard would oversee the construction of a new building to house the paper's headquarters and reposition the Times as a morning daily paper. The plant that opened in Munster, Indiana in 1989 was an impressive structure with a state-of-the-art gas press capable of printing 7 zoned editions of the Times each day for delivery over a wide area that included more than 80 communities. In the 1990s, the Times hired a crew of talented young designers whose work was soon showcased throughout the region. Northwest Indiana had always been a manufacturing center, but it was quickly becoming a transportation hub as well as a growth phenomenon. And the Times, the voice of the region, continued to be on the cutting edge of the information technology business. With the acquisition of the Vidette Messenger in Valparaiso and new offices in Crown Point and Portage, the Times started the new millennium as the dominant stakeholder in communications media in Northwest Indiana. With a network of resources embedded in communities and 9 editions published each day, the Times was reaching into more than 90,000 households every Sunday, and that number has not changed in almost 20 years. On February 12, 2002, Lee Enterprises, a newspaper company based in Iowa, acquired Howard Publications. As Lee CEO Mary Junk said at the time, it was very exciting for Lee to grow by 50% in a day. Lee Enterprises remains a leading provider of local news, information, and advertising, reaching 4.5 million households each day through 46 daily newspapers, a range of digital products, and more than 300 niche publications in 23 states. Chris White is currently the publisher of the Times and oversees not only our daily print and digital media brands, but our many specialty products encompassing dozens of titles across multiple platforms. Like many traditional print brands, the Times has undergone a metamorphosis in recent years. Certain departments at the Times have shrunk, but other departments have added jobs. We have hyper-local sites and replica versions of many Times magazines and special sections. The newspaper, which is still delivered to about 70,000 customers on a weekday basis, is only one of the many ways the Times is connected to hundreds of communities and targeted audiences interested in what's going on in Northwest Indiana, South Suburban Chicago, and the entire Lake Michigan area. The Times' many digital sites and locations are home to hundreds of thousands of stories, photo galleries, video, and audience-generated news and commentary. The Times has many millions of viewers every month. The Times is a full-service, 24/7 media company, creating high-quality, reliable, and sometimes entertaining news. The Times Media Company remains the dominant source of information in Northwest Indiana. Our core values of bringing information to our readers, driving results for our advertisers, and supporting collaborative efforts for the common good in our communities remains unchanged. The digital age is a challenging environment, but it is also exhilarating as new and innovative ways for audiences and advertisers to access information continue to emerge. It is thrilling to participate in the creation of something new and then watch it come to life and unfold on your screen. It is also as thrilling as it always has been to see the finished product you helped to create, build, or distribute come off the press each day. The impact of a changing economy on the media industry has been cathartic, but for those of us who work at the Times, there has never been a greater opportunity to be creative and use new skills to make things happen in our jobs, our lives, and our communities. We're involved, we're engaged, and we are the best when we are identifying opportunities, telling stories, helping our neighbors work through common problems. We love figuring out the options and providing solutions. The pace gets pretty intense sometimes, but it's a lot of fun. Welcome to our world.